The millions of people who visit the Cape Cod National Seashore each year treasure the beauty of the landscape. They marvel at its dunes, its marshes, its meadows, and its forests. They enjoy its ponds and especially its ocean beaches. The Cape Cod National Seashore is the anchor of open space protection for the Lower Cape.
Well, in my opinion, the Cape Cod National Seashore is probably the best thing that's happened to the Lower and Outer Cape for generations. It has provided a large amount of buffering and open space protection, which is mandated and protected and preserved well by the Park Service staff.
This National Seashore back in 1962 was one of the best things that ever came along for Wellfleet in the Lower Cape.
Most visitors assume that the federal government protects all of the land within the National Seashore, but this is not true.
Well, the map shows Cape Cod National Seashore, and I'm the superintendent, George Price, and when you see the green on the map, a lot of people are impressed by how much property that is actually in the boundary. Almost 44,000 acres was set aside by Congress with the legislation in 1961. However, when you take a look at that, it's a little bit misleading because only about 27,000 of those acres is actually owned in fee by the federal government. So the rest is either owned by the municipalities or by private owners or by others. And it was really one of the first attempts by the federal government with the National Park Service to really form a partnership, if you will, to try to set aside an area that would have the same values of the more traditional national parks you see out west.
So the Cape Cod National Seashore was different from the start. This unique partnership includes the National Park Service and 6 town governments, but also the 600 remaining private landowners within the park. They have worked together for the first 50 years, homeowners preserving the park's integrity and the Park Service respecting their privacy. But threats have recently emerged. As real estate values have skyrocketed, some landowners have ignored the park's ethic of living lightly on the land. They are building new homes on vacant lots in the seashore. They are demolishing small cottages in favor of large mansions. Will the integrity of the National Seashore be undone by these efforts? The Park Service has shown that it can work creatively with private landowners who want to preserve their land in the park. People like the Falk family.
There's something about coming here that people love. This is so beautiful. But if you put a bunch of little houses up around it, you've ruined the very thing that you value about it.
Lee Falk was a professional writer and theater icon in the 20th century who was best known as the creator of the comic strips The Phantom and Mandrake the Magician. He built a beautiful sprawling home named Xanadu in Truro atop the Pamet River Valley in 1956. When Lee Falk passed away, the family faced the tough decision of having to sell it. His daughter Valerie Falk, now the only year-round resident of Xanadu, was unaware of conservation options at the time, but she knew that it needed to be protected. A compromise was arranged that allowed the family to sell Xanadu to the National Seashore with a reserved life estate. This enabled the entire family to have exclusive use of the house through the lifetimes of Valerie and her stepmother. Since the National Seashore owns the property, it will remain safe from future development.
They were wonderful. They were very respectful and understanding. They did not make any promises that they could not fulfill, but they were always positive. And eventually, when it goes, they'll still be able to come back up to the top of the hill. Nobody will buy it and rip it apart and build something huge and ugly in its place and violate it.
Valerie Falk was referred to the Park Service by her friend on the Truro Conservation Trust. Each community has a nonprofit land trust that works privately with landowners in designing conservation and tax benefit strategies to help them preserve their property.
The fact that other properties are not entirely protected within the seashore dovetails well with private land trusts in the surrounding towns. The Eastham Conservation Foundation was established in the late 70s, and we've had the opportunity to work cooperatively with the Park Service to attempt to augment that protection status.
So the ability to work with land trusts as a non-government agency really provides a lot more flexibility than we might have as a federal organization. And frankly, there's advantages to a private property owner to work with the private land trusts as well. And from our perspective, we don't really care who actually owns the property as long as it's protected.
One of the important points that we in the trust are after is to preserve the most open space we can because of the habitat that it provides and because of all the natural settings that the citizens, both two-legged and four-legged, get to enjoy here.
One advantage of working with a private land trust is the word local. It is locally organized, it's locally managed, and the folks who are involved with it understand local conditions.
We are probably more flexible and quicker to act than the federal government on some of these conservation efforts.
The land trusts also offer advice in designing conservation plans to produce valuable tax benefits for landowners.
There are several tax advantages available to families who participate in conservation planning, and in combination, these tax benefits may satisfy the family's financial needs as well as preserve the property that they want to see protected. There have been several examples in recent years of landowners working to preserve property within the National Seashore, including donations of beach and dune and marsh in the Coast Guard beach system in Eastham, reserve life estates in Truro, donations of conservation restrictions in Wellfleet, and purchases of conservation restrictions in North Truro. And all of these examples have generated important tax benefits as well as cash sometimes for families.
The owners of one small property in Wellfleet enjoyed several different tax benefits for their gift of land. Artists Peter and Gloria Watts moved into their small Cape cottage in the Wellfleet woods in 1970. Pamet Point Road runs east and west across the valley floor between two steep ridges arched by tall oak trees. Across from their home was a 2-acre forest parcel that they owned. Because the lot's creation in 1949 predated the seashore zoning law, it was a separate building lot, but the Watts chose never to put a house on it.
I've always felt that it was a privilege to live in the park. With privilege comes responsibility, and the responsibility is to maintain the park without overdevelopment.
In 2007, the Watts approached the Wellfleet Conservation Trust with an idea to protect the vacant lot and its steep wooded slope with a conservation restriction. The Watts received a federal income tax deduction equal to the difference between the lot's value as a house lot and its value as a conservation lot, about a 90% reduction. The town lowered the property tax by 90%. After donating the conservation restriction, the Watts still owned the land but never used it, so they decided to receive a third tax benefit in 2011. They became one of the first landowners on Cape Cod to receive a state tax credit. They donated the land outright to the Wellfleet Conservation Trust.
So in combination, income tax, property tax, estate tax, these are all benefits available to landowners who want to participate.
The tax breaks were very advantageous to us, and I certainly think other people should do the same thing.
In the end, there will never be enough federal dollars or tax incentives to preserve the land within the Cape Cod National Seashore still under private ownership. We must rely on the goodwill of private families entrusted with the privilege of being able to live in the park to do the right thing, to inhabit this national seashore with respect for its rural charm and beauty.
There's an old saying that to whom much is given, much is expected in return. And the National Seashore provides so much for people who are privileged enough to live in it. The beauty of the landscape, the history of the area. But the National Seashore asks so little in return, simply for people to respect the mission of the park and to live lightly on the land.
But this is, it's magic. And I think from our point of view, where our kids will get this.
And our grandkids.
we would like it to be like it is, and that's why we gave that land.